G'day everyone, we're back working on the HG ute again, and as I mentioned last time we were here, we're going to tackle this back piece of the roof. Now, it's one of those situations where it was touch and go. It's not actually bad, but I'm going to do it anyway, mainly because I don't know what's on the other side of it. It's a box section, I can't see inside it, and I have discovered a little piece of old rust about here on the inner panel in there. So same thing as before, I could actually just cut that piece out with leaving this intact and repair it. But if I make a new back edge, I get rid of all this horrible pitting all the way along this corner, and I can blast inside there, I can get rid of any surface rust inside the box section, and I can repair the rotten section very easily. So we'll start by making a new piece, and I've roughly cut a piece of metal to shape, but it's got to have the curve put in the bottom. So what I'm going to do now is clamp it to the car and cut the bottom shape, and then we'll position it really nicely, and we can put this little bit of a fold in it. And for that, I'm just going to bend it on the car. So what I'll do is I'll get a hammer and some form of a former. I'll have a look and see what I've got. I haven't decided yet. And we'll just work our way across and just put that little recess in there, which will be easy peasy, and it's an easy sort of repair that you could tackle at home as well. So let's get into it. So I'm just going to mark the cut line with my pencil, and that's going to be super easy. Just run it along the original part of the roof. Now, I've marked the top and the bottom, and I don't like welding corners. So what I'm going to do is I'll trim the top edge down probably 1/4 inch, say 6mm below the fold, and then I'll cut the back panel in the same spot, and then I'll be able to weld on the flat. And that's a nice area to finish it off on, and I know that I'm not grinding my weld through on the corner. So we'll get that off and get it trimmed, and then we'll start forming the little fold that it has in there. And the little fold is necessary because the angle of the glass doesn't match the angle of this box section. So it's got this little recess folded all the way across it. Now I'm cutting the top edge to match the roof at the moment, and I'll trim a bit more off it later. Mainly because it's easier to shape with the least amount of material possible. And this edge is going to move a little bit anyway once we start forming it into that little bit of a fold. But once we get it done and looking good on the car, then we can work out where we're going to trim it to. Now this is about as simple as it gets when it comes to forming a panel on top of another panel. We've just got this one little bit of a fold in it. It's not very complicated, and it's not very deep either. So the main thing is just matching the angles up before we start cutting the car away. Now I tend to always make my replacement pieces on top of the car before I do any cutting. That way you know what the piece is ultimately going to look like, and you can use the stability in the panel that's still already there to form your new piece of metal on. And even if you've got something that's rusted completely away, there's no reason why you can't use a filler. And if you use a fiberglass filler to reshape the original rusty piece of metal back to the original profile, and then form your replacement patch on that, and then you cut the rusted piece and the filler out, and you can weld your new piece into the good metal surrounding it. And I've done that in the past too, where I've been working on a complicated shape or an intricate little corner or something like that, and that works as well. Okay. Starting to look very Holden-y already. We have our new bit of metal. It just doesn't know it yet. What I've got here is a few of my T-dollies. Now this is the sort of stuff you can just make from round bar and a bit of scrap flat bar, and you make them in different sizes and put different radiuses on the end, and they're really good to put in a vise and form a piece of sheet metal over the top. If you've got a nice radius on the end of them, you can actually form little corners and bits and pieces like that. So they're just a super handy tool, but I often use them with a hammer, and you can see by the way this is flared out on this end. If you've got to put a recess in something, they'll work the same way like that. So you can just hold it in the line that you want to run the recess in and hammer the other end of it, and it'll form the piece of metal into the crevice, which is exactly what we're about to do. So we know that crevice is up about here. So just by running a line in the dust more or less with my finger, we know where we want it. I'm working it a little bit at a time, and when the noise changes it means I'm hitting the piece of metal behind it. So you get that sort of nice solid thud noise when we come down on the other piece of metal. Now by clipping the vice grip on and off, I can tell if there's any spring in the metal, but that's just sitting there in the same shape. So we've got that bent to the shape we want it. And for an inside panel, that's good enough. Like if it was an outside panel, you would work it more and get rid of some of the tool marks and things like that. But this has only got to be functional, not aesthetic. So we'll leave it at that. I'll retrim this bottom edge. And now that it has moved a little bit, it's dropped down on this end. So we'll just get an accurate line on that so that we can work back to that. And then we'll just mark it off this top edge down a little bit, and then we can cut this one to shape. And we'll use the new panel to mark the cut line onto the original. It's quite hot in here today, I'm sweating a bit. I'll just mark this line while I've got everything set up. Now that gives us our cut line, and we're down from the top, I'd say right from that top corner about 10 mil. I might actually make that a little bit shorter than that, come up a bit higher. We don't know how far the rust will go up on the inside. I'm not expecting it to be overly rusty. Just got to be super careful doing this. Don't run your finger along the cut edge on the new piece of metal, because then we will have blood and sweat. And from there I could move to tears quite easily. Nobody likes ouchies. Okay, that should work. Time to cut again. Now I love these little tech screws for holding stuff in place, and it means I can take it apart and put it back together several times and make sure I get it back in the same spot. So for this length panel, I think I'm going to put about 4 in, and we'll just get 1 on each end and a couple closer to the middle, and that means that once I start taking away the rusted piece, I can lay the new piece back in place and put it back in exactly the same spot each time. And the holes that these create, I'll just weld up with the welder, and that'll form one of our plug welds as we go across. I've still got a little bit of a mismatch in my new panel to the original, so this is still a little bit longer, and that's because a pencil line is actually quite wide, so you can mark something with a pencil, and we always tend to cut on the waist side anyway, so I've got pretty much the thickness of the pencil mark there. So I'll run a new line across there with the scriber now, and that'll give us our final cut, and that should line up beautifully to the original. And also I'll get in the car so I can see carefully what I'm doing and get it a lot more accurate. So that's given me a nice deep scratch line, so that should be pretty easy to follow with the snippers. And the green handled snippers will cut to the right of a marked line, so your waist will curl up on the right, and the red handled ones cut to the left of the line. So we really need both types. And the only difference is the jaws just face the other way around, the upper and lower. Trimming's a bit like shaping metal. A little bit at a time is always better than cutting one big piece off and cutting it in the wrong spot. Look at that. Just down by about 1/2 millimetre from where the original is. Which would be in tolerance. But I think I might just run the grinder across there at this stage and get it bang on the money. With this type of window opening, the more effort you put into getting them right, the better off you'll be putting the car together. They do have a bit of a tolerance, particularly on this lip here. It can be a bit fatter, it can be a bit longer, but if you've got one of these windows with a moulding on it, you know, this back window doesn't have one, but the moulding ones are really fussy because you've got to have the shape of the moulding match the shape of the car. So quite often with rust repairs, you can upset that, and the glass won't sit properly in the hole, the moulding will be ticked up in one little corner or something like that, and then it just spoils the look of the car. So I prefer to put more effort in now so that later on I know it's all going to fit together perfectly. Okay, that's got that lining up really quite nice. Now, you might notice it's got a little bit of a lump just in here, but that's factory. That's actually matching the original on the inside, but we might just take him back a little bit more in that spot because I can see that. They do have discrepancies from factory, but if we fine tune them a little bit, the car will be better off for it. And that's just a little light deburring so I don't cut myself on the edge that we've created. Okay, I'm just going to pencil line where I'm going to cut the roof for now, because at this stage it's not super accurate, because I'm going to cut below that line and give myself a little bit of material left over up here for now, and that'll just help stabilise it while we've got to do any other repairs around it. And then once we're happy with the lower inner panel, we can fine tune this top panel, so this one will just drop straight in there, run a beater weld across it, give it a bit of a grind, and we've got the job done. Put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart. Always fun. So we're going to sacrifice all of this panel up to that line. We don't need that anymore. It may be good on the back, it may not be, we don't know, but coming in just from this fold, it's a nice place to weld it, and we'll know for sure that we're well above any rust that's growing up the back of it. So in this situation, we can throw that piece away. It makes no difference to the job, and it really puts it all back into a nice spot for welding and finishing it. So we'll get into it and grind it off. So I'll just split it with a cutting wheel, and I'll probably come in, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch or 6 mil below that line for now, and I'll take the burr off the back of it so I don't accidentally cut myself. And what I'll do is I'll probably cut it along here and just leave the little section on the bottom that's spot welded on there, and then we'll drill those spot welds and get rid of that as well, and then we can start fitting the new piece in and make sure it's all going to work before we start gluing it. Good stuff. It's actually not too bad in there, but I'm glad we're replacing all this pitted area. And I can see we've got this little rusted spot in the corner, and there could be a few more along that edge. So it definitely needs a bit of a blast up. So I'll start separating this lip on here now and getting that opened up so that we can get inside it. It's a hot day today. Right, that's got the bulk of it cleaned up now, and I've still got to trim this edge to the shape of our new piece of metal. I've had a good look in here, and the only spot is those few rust spots over there, and they're right on the corner, so I'm just going to run a bit of weld across those and grind them back into the shape of the metal, and then later on I'll finish the inside with the grinder. And I've got a few spots where I've poked the drill through, but also it was a little bit rotten on the inside, but same thing. I'll just get the welder and put a few passes on those from the other side, and that'll repair that all back to good metal. This sustained a little bit of damage getting it apart, mainly because this inner panel's only 2/3 the thickness of the outer panel, so whenever you're trying to salvage a thin panel from a thick panel, you're going to have a few issues like that. So I've worked that, I've got that pretty good, and once we put the turret skin back on top of it, we can just hammer that around to get that to line up perfectly with that. So I'm not worried about any of that at the moment. The only little concern I had was there was a spot weld right next to where I'd put my tech screw on this edge here, and it's broken this inner panel away, and it's taken our tech screw hole. So we've got 3 others, and we'll just have to lift this end up to line up, and we've got the top edge to work from, we've got the side to work from, so we're not going to have too many dramas there. So what I'll do is get this waste piece of material cut from the top. This top bow here has dropped a little bit, same thing, not unusual. This was pressed from a flat piece of metal, and there's always locked up stresses in these panels, so as soon as you start cutting them or things like that, they will move a little bit. But this panel doesn't really matter much. If this was 1 millimetre lower in the car or 2 millimetres lower in the car, it doesn't affect anything greatly. But because we've got this cut line marked off our original piece when it was screwed to the uncut car, we can actually spot that back in there, lift it up onto the screw holes, and we'll get this back to where it was anyway. So keep moving forward and we'll get a bit more done. The rust that we have on this panel here is really minor. It's only surface rust. The capillary action's brought a little bit in between the layers, and there'll be the odd little rust pit in there that if you didn't have access to a sandblaster, a wire brush grinding wheel would do the job nicely, a chemical treatment, or both of them, and you get this back to really good condition, and you can paint over that, weld from the other side, and have no dramas with that. So I'm just a bit fortunate I've got the blaster set up and ready to go. I can just jump out there and blast it and prime it, And inside the box section, there's just what I'd call dusty rust. It hasn't actually caused any pitting or anything like that. It's just turned the surface from being the original silver metal to just a brown. And if you wiped your hands across it, you'd have a bit of brown come off from that rust. But that could be there for another multiples of decades and it would never be a problem. And given that we've taken the car apart to restore it, if we squirted a bit of rust preventer or something like that up in a car like this, there certainly wouldn't be any problems. So, as I said originally, this was one of those repairs that was touch and go whether it was actually even necessary, but now that I've taken it apart, I am actually really glad that I did it. So it'll make the car more sound, and failing it being involved in an accident, it should be around for a long, long time. Done, done, done. And because we've got this series of holes and this little corner is just so wafer thin, it's a case of just zap, 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 but hit your wire back into the still red hot glowing puddle, and that way you'll get a continuous weld with it, and just let it cool down. If we did that all in one pass, we would pucker this corner up and muck up our alignment with our glass. So we don't want to do that. So, and being a hot day, we'll give it a little bit longer between passes as well. But it'll come up nice. It's just that little corner. And obviously the glass has been leaking here, and we know that it was because it's had an old rust repair done in here previously, and this moisture has got through and just sat in that little corner just between the layers of metal, and it's just caused the rust to grow. Well, that's got him welded up nicely, and as you can see in the end there, I could do a bit of a pass on the edge of it where I had to just fill in a little gap and there was no drama, so we're welding into good metal around it. So we'll let that cool down, give him a grind up, and that'll be that part of the job done. I've got this all blasted up and I've nitpicked it a little bit, and I made one mistake. There's one of my tech screw holes, there's another one, and the one we had left's about there somewhere, but I welded it up thinking it was one that I'd poked through with the drill, so not to worry, we'll get around that. This is little rust out spots, but I've got to weld these two edges together, so once I get it assembled up, I can get inside with the MIG welder and just put a couple of passes over that and build the thickness up, and that'll tie this piece to the outside piece anyway, so it doesn't matter much. And the same there, I've poked a hole through with the drill when I was drilling a spot weld out. I'll just plug that from the back, and our tech screw holes, they'll get plugged from the back as well, so no biggies there. The big drama is the roof has dropped in the middle, and we're going to have to lift that back up, and I've got a couple of ideas. One is to spot this end in place and get a few tacks in place, and then just lift the opposite end to get it to line up, and that'll probably work quite well. Or I can put this screw in here and work my way across and sort of lever this up as we go as well. So there's a couple of choices there, but not a real big problem either. So I'm going to get in there and snot it all together and make it back into a car again. think that's how we're going to go about it. I can weld that through to about here and then lift it, get that screw in. So that's going to work quite well. So it's just a matter of holding my mouth right and getting it lined up and get a few tacks in place. Just needs a little bit of fitting in this corner, and I'm talking less than 1 millimetre of thickness, just to let it sit down properly. But we've got him now, so get that tacked together and then we can start welding it. There was a little situation, this little tack weld didn't quite take and it popped out and the new piece just went outside of the roof and it dropped into it. But I was able to just get it back by putting a bit of pressure and tapping it and able to walk the top piece up the angle on the approach there. It's like a little ramp, and that's fixed the problem for me. That's a bit better. Well, it's pretty hot in here today, so I've got so far, but I'm going to let it cool down a little bit, probably for 10 or 15 minutes at this stage. But it's coming up nice, everything's all sitting together well. Now, I've cheated a lot here. Normally I would recommend bringing your tacks in closer and closer until they're 20 millimetres or 3/4 of an inch apart. But I've got this nice sharp edge to work from here. I've only got a small amount of metal here. I tacked it enough to make it stable, and then I started welding in between it, and I can get away with that just because of the shape of the panel I'm working with. If I was working on the side of a door or a quarter panel, naturally I'd have to tack it a lot closer together before I started welding it properly. But it's butt welded all the way across. It's all going to work out nice, it'll grind up, and when it's done, no one's even going to know that we've ever been in here and done it, apart from the paint on the inside of it. So this is going to make it a really good repair for years to come. I'll spot weld this lip back together along here, and I'll just do that with the resistance welding with the spot welder, and next time we get back together we'll be prepping the turret and fixing that and getting ready to put that back on. So I'm Rob Teal, thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll just sweat away down here for a few more hours and get this all cleaned up and tidied up, and we'll be ready for the next time. Thanks, guys. Put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart. Always fun.